Today, let's talk about abandonment. That's a big word, isn't it? Several years ago, my wife Lori and I flew out to San Francisco. And while there, I was traveling around the northern part of California, speaking at church, schools, just doing what we do. And we were at a particular school in that region of the country. And when I was speaking, there was a young lady there, and I really connected with her. And when I got through speaking, I went down and I said, "You mind if you and I just have a conversation?" Lori joined us, and the principal came alongside, and we were talking. And I said, "I would really love to hear your story." And I noticed she was very kind of shy and bashful at first. She said, "Why do you want to hear my story?" I said, I got a feeling. I just want to know your story." She said, "Well, if you really want to know it, I'll tell it to you." I said, "I really want to know it." And we sat there together, and she began to take us back many, many years to where she had been born in China. And as I listened to her tell the beginnings of her life, I began to hear her voice kind of crack. And she said to me, she says, "Dean, I was at 4 years old, I was adopted." I said, "Okay." She said, my adopted dad and I went on a trip." I said, "Well, tell me about the trip." She said, "Well, we went to this big city in China." She said, "We stayed at this great hotel." She said, "When we got to the hotel, we checked in." She said, "We went in, put all of our stuff in our room." She said, I was 4 years old." She said, "We went downstairs in that elevator," and she said, "We went to this restaurant, had a great dinner." She said, "I went to sleep that night. I woke up the next morning." And she said, "I looked around the room and my dad wasn't there." She said, "I waited for quite some time." She said, "I was getting hungry." She said, "Maybe he's downstairs in that restaurant." She said, "So I figured out where that elevator was. I figured out how to get the doors to open." She said, "I went down to the bottom." She said, "I stepped out of the elevator," and she said, "There were people everywhere. It's like being in a hotel in New York City, just people everywhere." She said, "I found the restaurant." She said, "I literally went from table to table looking to see if my dad was there. He wasn't in the restaurant." She said, "I went back," and what she was describing was the front desk. She said, "I went back to the front area of the hotel where people were just, exchanging, they were checking out." She said, "He wasn't there." She said, "Somehow I ended up on the street in front of the hotel." Keep in mind, get a picture of like New York City or Los Angeles where, just people everywhere walking back and forth. She said, "I stood there watching for my dad." She said, "Dean, I stood there for 3 days. He never came back." At this point, she begins to just cry. And as I listened to her kind of just regain her composure, she said, "A family from America adopted me and they brought me here and I've grown up here." I said, "What a story." I said, "I'm so sorry you went through that, but I really believe your story is going to be used to help a lot of people who have dealt with this whole issue of abandonment." Maybe today you know what that feels like. Maybe you haven't been physically abandoned, but maybe you've been emotionally abandoned. I can kind of relate to that. I was told much later in my life that I had been emotionally abandoned by my mom. She wasn't a bad person. She just wasn't able to give me maybe what I needed at that point in my life. But you know what happens when you're abandoned? You try to figure out ways to make up that space in your heart. What can you do? And everything that you and I try to do, except one, everything else is a counterfeit. Maybe you know what abandonment feels like. Maybe you have trust issues. Maybe it's hard for you to trust a mom, a dad, an aunt, uncle, grandparent. Maybe it's hard to trust a boyfriend, girlfriend, a teacher, a coach. Maybe it's hard to trust yourself. And maybe, just maybe, it's hard for you to trust a God whom you cannot see, when those around you whom we can see maybe have let you down. I got some good news for you today. I believe this with every fiber in my body, that born into every human being who has ever walked the planet is a space reserved solely and wholly for God's Spirit. He wants to come take up residence in your life. You can't do anything to make God love you any more than he already does. And conversely, you can't do anything to make God love you any less than he does. Because in one simple phrase, here's the truth: God is love. Here's a scripture you can hang on to. It's found in Hebrews chapter 13, verse 5. For he himself has said, Jesus has said, here's your promise: I, Jesus, will never leave you nor forsake you. That, my friend, is a reason to remind yourself that your life really does matter.